We speak a lot about on the show. The show is all about how do traditional incumbents go up against large tech monopolies and what is going on with this? A key tenet of that is this thing called corporate innovation. So what is corporate innovation? And how do you go about thinking about this? Pretty broad general term, could mean a lot of different things. So the way I think about it is there's kind of two major buckets. There's corporate innovation, which is focused on incrementally improving the core business. You've got to be doing that. If you're a large traditional business, an incumbent business, you need to be digitizing the core business. You're not necessarily making wholesale changes to your business model, but you are finding how to make incremental wins, to digitize the existing, to use data, big data, to use AI. How do I kind of help automate, help accelerate, help weave digital into my existing business model? Okay. These are going to be, I'd say, less risky projects. These are going to be projects that are probably very large in scale, have a much larger price tag associated with them, a much larger time to implement, because what you're doing is making changes that are going to affect your core business, right? You don't want to be taking big bets on these things, and you need to get them right. You need to make improvements on the core business to stay competitive. And so this is definitely a key area of focus. The other bucket of corporate innovation is what you would call disruptive innovation. This is where you're really exploring new business models. So if you're kind of thinking of a time horizon, right, you might be thinking of a 1 to 3 year time horizon on incremental improvements. And on the new business model time horizon, you might be thinking on the 3, 5, or farther out time horizon in terms of what are the new business models coming into my industry? What might cannibalize my existing business model? What might be accretive or complementary? How am I figuring out how to what new business models are coming in and what I need to be doing as a result of that, right? The one overarching school of thought in terms of exploring disruptive innovation is how do you give a small team very little time and very little money? How can you go and learn a lot and try out and make small bets and get a lot of learnings, fail fast, right? All of these kinds of mental models that should be deployed, particularly when exploring disruptive innovation. When you look at the different options that you have to explore, there's in the world of disruptive innovation, there's a closed avenue and there's an open avenue. And basically, there are closed initiatives that you could be doing, which are purely kind of inside of your organization. And then there are more open initiatives where you are going to be looking externally. So what could you be doing disruptively that's closed and internal? What could you be doing that's open and external? There might be a hybrid overlap space in between there, but there are generally these two buckets. So that's closed and internal. You could kind of think about internal incubators that you're setting up. How am I letting my teams, do the 80-20 rule, try out new skunk projects, try out new initiatives? How am I enabling my existing employees to innovate, to be creative, to incubate new ideas, fail fast, and all of those kinds of things. You could also think about this as an R&D lab, especially if you're in the world of patents, which could even be a much farther out timeline than 3 or 5 years for patents. But what kind of new technologies am I incubating or investing in for the long term that if these technologies take off, I could build a new business model around this, or it could be disruptive to my core business model, so on and so forth, right? These are initiatives that you are really leveraging your internal assets, making sure that you're tapping into the different pockets of innovative thinkers and intrapreneurs. We just covered intrapreneurs on yesterday's session, and how you bring this all together inside of the company, right? The more open external initiatives would be looking at things like accelerators. And there's a lot of corporate accelerators. There's a lot of firms that will help companies set up their own accelerators or kind of hybrid models where it's a large company sponsoring accelerator. You could also just be tapping into or keeping your thumb on existing accelerators and what interesting companies are coming out of those accelerators and trying to keep on top of what the different startup trends are. Typically some kind of like head of innovation type of person would be overseeing this and liaising with the startup community and these different accelerator type programs. There are also startup networks that large companies can engage with where, that startup network has a more curated ecosystem of startups that maybe they weren't all, they weren't in an accelerator program. So you're not restricted to what comes through that specific accelerator, but you're saying, hey, I'm just going to look at the whole world of startups. I have a network of these startups, and we're going to help you kind of like speed date. We're going to help understand the needs of the corporate business, and we're going to help go and set up all, help curate to you all the different startups that could be interesting to you. This might be helpful if you're a head of innovation and maybe you don't have a large staff, or it might be helpful if you don't have a head of innovation at all. And you can kind of help externalize some of that work, and they will help tee up a lot of meetings and understand your needs and help maybe see if there's some partnerships or prototypes or collaborations or investments that could come out of that. Then there's the whole world of corporate venture capital, which you could actually have, what they call a CVC arm, where you'd have a head of corporate venture capital that you give some funds to, or maybe you do deals on a one-off basis, where now you are doing some investments, you're maybe doing some partnerships with startups, and specifically saying we want to deploy capital into startups, and having someone own that, really know the space and run all of that. You also have corporate venture studios. So venture studios, we've covered on the show, are helping to bring a strategy, resources, and capital around a new business opportunity, helping to incubate that, help the business get off the ground, maybe some demand or supply or both. And then you let that startup go and raise other external capital and hopefully be wildly successful. But now there are corporate venture studios that will specifically try to partner with either a head of innovation, a head of the CVC arm, or something like that, and say, hey, are there some opportunities that we could help spin up and build from scratch in cooperation with this large traditional enterprise? And so that's kind of the corporate venture studio world, which there are more and more of those propping up these days. And then I would say lastly would just be having a corporate development department, a head of strategy that's looking at M&A. You could also be looking at one-off investments or partnerships in this group. You could be looking at outright acquisitions, a hybrid or a mixture of all of those different things, and looking at how does M&A help to accelerate these new opportunities. I think the key thing in all of this is trying to figure out what is important. Where do I start? Where do I need to invest? Where do I need to accelerate? Where do I need to solve some gaps? And I think that's the really difficult thing. And I go back to my point about giving a small team very little time and very little money, because there are so many different options and so many different opportunities, right? Especially if you're a large multi-billion-dollar company. The hard part is to say, I've got 100 opportunities of here. How do I say 99 no's? How do I make the one right yes? And then I need to execute on that and capture that opportunity effectively. But if you are spreading too many bets and spreading yourself too thin, you're never going to be able to execute effectively in the first place. So how do you get the right level of conviction to say, this is where we need to own? This is a key part of our future. This is a key new disruptive business model that is important. It's a part of our vision. It's a part of who we are. We need to own this, versus, should I just invest in this? Maybe this is an incremental improvement, going back to, what is disruptive versus an incremental innovation for the core business? How do you balance these two different sides? So you could be doing external functions that I've spoken about here that are also helping to make incremental improvements in the core business. Do you need to buy that startup, or just maybe do an investment or a partnership, and your business can still get the benefit and get that incremental improvement? There's no silver bullet to all of this. There's a lot of different options to weigh. But these are some of the different buckets and some of how I would break down kind of how you could kind of think about the world of corporate innovation. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.